Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you all enjoyed your caffeine injection. Julian was mentioning fire drills earlier on. There was one occasion when I was doing a conference like this, and there was a fire drill actually during the coffee break, and a very senior official from a well-known welfare organisation was very resentful, and is still bitterly resentful to this day, that I had had the foresight to take out my coffee cup and biscuits for our chat in the freezing November drizzle as we waited outside. Happily, hasn't happened today. So for those of you who have seen me chair one of these sessions before for Animal Welfare Foundation, sorry, I'm back. For those who haven't, my name is Nick Powell. I am the sports editor of Sky News, and I'm a presenter on Sky Sports News, which has very little to do with animal welfare, but it does involve controlling conversations and keeping things to time. And Erica Singh, who most of you know, has the metaphorical equivalent of an ejector seat button if I don't keep everything to time. So I'll be brutal with the panelists as well, and I'll be asking all of you when you make contributions later on to try and make your points, your questions as succinct as possible. We'll get through as many as we possibly can. We've got an excellent panel who you will hear from for 10 minutes apiece on the subject. Technology is changing, it's not changing, it's challenging, it's changing as well. Technology is challenging the paradigm of animal welfare. That's the topic for our discussion for the next hour and a half or so. Before I introduce the first speaker, I'd just like to invite you to answer a question. You'll need Slido for this on your phone. So this is where it's okay to appear not to be paying attention to the debate. We actually want you to get your phone out. If you've got the app, you can use the app. If you haven't, it's slido.com. Slido.com. The event code is AWF 23. That's pretty straightforward. AWF 23. And you will see, if you go there and go to the polls bit at the top, not the Q&A bit, but the polls bit, you'll see a question, and I'm going to invite you to vote, if vote is the word, for one of the three possible answers. So the question, or the statement we want you to comment on is, I see the value in using technology to further animal welfare. I see the value in using technology to further animal welfare, and you'll see there, if you're on the right bit of Slido, the options are, as a response to that, not yet, I don't understand its relevance or role, or potentially, but I have concerns, e.g. usability, reliability, or yes, I am a user and or advocate. So the statement you're responding to, I see the value in using technology to further animal welfare, and your three options in response to that: not yet, I don't understand its relevance or role. Potentially, but I have concerns, e.g. usability, reliability, or yes, I am a user and or advocate. I'll give you a moment or two more just to nudge the more tech-savvy person next to you for help in how to use Slido. If you've got a less tech-savvy person next to you, bad luck, sorry about that. And then we'll have a look at the responses, and we'll do this again at the end of the discussion and see if there's been any movement or absolutely no movement. Sometimes there's lots, sometimes there isn't. So let's have a look. Technical people, at how the voting has gone. There we go. So yes, I'm a user and or advocate. Is that 53%? Yeah. And then 43% for number two, potentially, but I have concerns. And not yet, I don't understand its relevance or role. 4% is just adjusting slightly, but let's call that at 53, 44 and 4%. And we'll see how that compares at the end. Right, more than enough from me for the moment. Let me introduce our first speaker, first of four, Jonathan Statham is Chair of Animal Health and Welfare Board of England. John.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you very much, AWF and the trustees, for the invitation to be here. It is a great pleasure. I should just perhaps start, though, by apologising for what will be the crushing disappointment that this isn't actually Jason Statham speaking. It was advertised as Jason in some quarters, but Nick, you know, is kind of clearly understands the power of marketing, obviously, with these things. I'm going to try and compensate for that just ever so slightly. But I want to basically draw on this question from a variety of roles. So I have been very fortunate that I am in a number of different roles in the vet profession. So yes, chair of the Animal Health and Welfare Board for England, and I'm also Professor of Sustainable Livestock Health and Welfare at Harper and Keele Vet School. But I'm basically embedded within practice. I'm a vet in practice. I was on Farms in Practice yesterday, and I'm also Chief Exec of a sustainable technology company. So I'm going to try and draw on those different perspectives in answering this question today. And therefore, more questions than answers, but 5 key points I'm keen to look at. First of all, just some thoughts around how we define technology. Secondly, some specifics around the animal health and welfare pathway, and therefore policy around welfare and technology. But also to look at how do we measure welfare? What are the potential implications for things like telemedicine questions, and the interaction, therefore, of technology and humans. Also moving out of my comfort zone of ruminants into monogastric species and also the zoo sector. And then finishing with a key question around education. So definitions, first of all. It's important that, you know, we challenge. Technology is a very broad church. You know, it covers lots and lots of things. So we need to think about how we describe technology, and I would encourage everybody to read widely and to discuss widely what we mean by technology. Certainly, the use of knowledge to turn resources into kind of key goods and services that society needs and wants is one definition, but I encourage you to read and kind of consider further how we describe it. Because technology undoubtedly has its pros and cons. Undoubtedly, through the ages, technology has provided different challenges. This is not a new challenge. And actually, how we use technology and how we take responsibility for it is the key. Because this flint axe might be used for providing shelter, but it could also be used to be buried into the skull of a competitor. And so how we use and deploy technology is as relevant now as it was then, and responsibilities about how we use it. So I would therefore argue that digital technology, it doesn't have to be an either or with human input. It doesn't have to be that we choose between technology or human kind of values and human observational input. I think it's essential that we've got the human factor with technology. It's essential that we combine these different facets in trying to achieve a balance, and I'll come back to that balance. So first of all, around kind of animal health and welfare pathway and therefore policy. Well, we have got new publicly funded schemes that are seeking to deliver enhanced welfare as well as health on our livestock farms. And the key sort of 4 funding programs that public money is supporting include, first of all, a review on farm by vets and veterinary-led teams, basically looking at the bespoke needs of that farm, trying to prioritise, trying to measure what's going on, but also engage in just the sort of social change and behavioural change that this morning's sessions talked about, creating understanding and rapport to achieve change. But also, the 4th area is, at the moment, there's the opportunity to apply for technology grants. So farmers have got the opportunity at the moment to invest with some subsidy in technology. And that's important because the stated aims around policy are about helping to deliver a 25-year environment plan, helping to deliver on our key welfare objectives, but also understanding how we have this balance between also kind of farmer needs and where we are with food security as well. So there's a balance here that technology could be part of. So I'm going to look at where there are other success stories in technology. So at the moment, we can use technology, for example, bioacoustics, to measure the biodiversity on a farm. We can use the same technologies of bioacoustics to listen to cows' rumens and understand the health and what's going on in a cow's rumen. Technology can be a really useful adjunct that's interpreted by kind of humans as we go forward. And therefore, when we look to measure welfare, we've got excellent established approaches to measure welfare that are evidence-based. They can also be quite time-consuming. And one of the questions is that how do we still make sure we champion these established ways to measure welfare, but in between time, can we look at ways that we can populate welfare measurement in a way that recognises scarce labour, that also recognises the need for time series and repeated measures between those high-quality observational pieces that go forward. And Sarah's here, the animal welfare assessments grid has been used in a number of areas, from zoos to livestock, across the spectrum of companion animals. But it also means that, does this mean if we have that information, we no longer need to go and look at things? And I don't believe that's the case. This is about adding increased opportunity to interpret those streams of information from technology. And we still need the human input to be there. We've got a good track record now of reliability and usability in the technology space on farms. And actually, we can use further interpretation rather than just an alert that something's wrong, but the patterns of technology outputs can actually help describe how well an animal is coping in a particular environment. So the technology is moving on rapidly in a way that gives new opportunities. But this is all about balance. How do we balance the human elements that we again heard discussions about this morning with the environment, with animal health and welfare? How do we do that in different environments all around the world? So with a global perspective about how animals are kept. And therefore moving away from that ruminant discussion to zoo animals and monogastric animals, then there's great evidence out there of how technology can help understand and measure welfare dynamics in the zoo situation. And again, there's good references and papers here that describe that application. We're just capturing data, for example, in a phone-based app. But also in those areas that we most associate with larger populations, technology can actually offer, when interpreted by vets and other members of the team, really helpful information that can help avoid further problems, but also to precision manage what's going on in those situations. And for example, in the pig sector, those same bioacoustic measurements I talked about can help describe early onset of problems with a respiratory outbreak, or even more subtle conditions such as kind of pig wasting disease, where sound analysis is important there too. But I want to kind of close this discussion really with education, because there's an opportunity here as a vet in practice to see my role is helping to achieve a balance in each farm situation between health and welfare, as I'm committed to doing, but also understanding responsibilities about food security, about human health, zoonotic disease, antimicrobial resistance, and also how all of it impacts on the environment. And to do that, the opportunity to have tools that will help me do that is something that I'm very interested in. And therefore, starting that education journey early, integrating how vets can interpret technology earlier and earlier into the undergraduate curriculum is a helpful move in my opinion, and I'm involved in doing that. So second years in veterinary colleges, being exposed to understanding how technology can help to measure welfare and help to understand that balance. I'm going to close this now, but just there's lots of thank yous to make. There's lots and lots of people involved in obviously this welfare journey that we're all part of. But I do want to just say a big thank you to Don Broom, who's speaking this afternoon, because his support for the last 33 years, the first professor of animal welfare and my director of studies back in 1990, and Don's support for the last 33 years and still now is really key. So education is how I want to close, and a thank you to Don in that regard as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. What a pro. I didn't even have to give you the 2-minute warning because you told me you were winding up, and you did wind up. You'll be very popular. You'll be back. Arriving at the podium now is our second of the 4 speakers, Nicola Blackie. He's Senior Lecturer in Production Animal Science at the Royal Veterinary College. Nicola, you've got 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. I'm going to focus mainly on dairy production, but I am interested in all farm animals. And I thought it would be useful to put into context how big a change we have seen in the UK dairy industry. Just looking at a few of these numbers, we've gone from a herd size of average of 17 to about 160, and the range is even bigger when you start looking at that. And alongside that, we've also seen a really big, as I say, change in herd size, but the number of people per cow has gone the opposite way. So there's a lot of animals per person now. And within technology in the dairy industry, in the 1970s, we saw the introduction of the individual ID of a cow. We then started to see disease detection sensors, mainly around mastitis in the 1980s. Automatic milking came in the 1990s. And now we're seeing more sensors with multiple uses. So we've had a real revolution in terms of what sensors are available. So just to give you an idea, this is my teched up cow. So there are lots of different places we can attach tech to. And just to give you some examples here, so this is on the ear. So you can have things like real-time positioning, you can have calving prediction through things like reduction in activity, estrus detection, rumination. I won't do my cow impression of how it tells the difference between eating and ruminating. You can ask me about that at lunch. But it does, so it does, it recognises the position of the ear and activity. But we can also use things like leg-based sensors or neck-based sensors, and they do much the same as I've already mentioned, but they maybe do things like steps, and also some of them will do things like lameness detection and gait analysis. So there's lots and lots of things that we can measure. Also, we can have rumen or reticulum-based sensors, so they're actually inside the cow, and they can measure things like temperature, pH, water intake, alongside all the other things that I've already mentioned. And then we've got lots of other things that we can do that maybe don't involve sensors on the animals. So we can look at body condition scoring through camera-based systems. We can look at milk quality and yield through the parlour. We can actually look at blood metabolites, so things like putting a microchip into the cow. We can look at methane, lots and lots of different things. So there is a wide variety that we can use. But I think from a welfare point of view, how we use the data matters. So there's lots and lots of production information that we can get. But some of that production information we can actually use in another way. So for example, steps, we could look at things like if the animals are pacing or unhappy about their situation. It might be things like grass availability. Motion intensity has been validated to represent play behaviour, and we know that play behaviour is a positive welfare indicator. So we want to have that information. Temperature gives you obviously health, which is directly related to welfare, but it also can indicate issues with housing, things like heat stress, so we can use that data for that. Also feeding and lying times, so that might give us information about lameness, social rank. Are cows being bullied? Are they having to change their daily activity? Also real-time positioning, so things like separating themselves, or also resource use. So I've had a student spend many hours looking at cows using brushes. We know that they like them, it's positive, it's a luxury behaviour, so if we can use that to measure that welfare. And we can also use the feeding and ruminating measures to actually look at things like social licking. So we know that cows receive or are receivers of licking depending on their health status. And in terms of benefits, the main one is cows are very stoic. They are designed to not tell you that there's anything wrong because you'll get eaten by a lion or something similar. So it's very subtle, the changes in behaviour it's detecting. You can also prioritise time for welfare enhancing tasks. So estrus detection, for example, a lot of technology used for that. You're looking at 3 or 4 20 to 30 minute slots of observation a day. And one of those should really be at night because 40% of your cows express estrus at night. So if we don't have to be watching them for that, we could be watching them for other problems. We can have individual management in a herd situation, so we can pick out individuals that we need to have a better look at. It could possibly replace the need for the vet to visit the farm. So as John mentioned about telemedicine, we could gather the information remotely and we'd have to travel less. We can then target individual animals for interventions, and it could be time saving. So again, it gives us more time for treatment and actually fixing the problem with the animals. And can we use the data for welfare metrics? So can we use it as a way of showing that our cows have got appropriate lying times, that they're spending plenty of time eating, etc. Some of the challenges, and the big challenges are the outputs don't always align to biological processes, and they're often designed by someone who's very good with computers and not necessarily had much to do with the animals. And often they give earlier detection, which is brilliant, but it's really difficult to ground truth because we don't know when the problem started. But also things like alert timings. If you have too many alerts, you just start ignoring it. And a good example of that would be an alert for lameness. You pick the foot up and you can't see anything on the hoof of the animal. You go, well, that doesn't work, it's no good. But it takes up to 8 to 9 weeks for the lesions to actually show on the bottom of the cow's foot. So you're seeing it, so you might have done the trimming and actually you've sorted it before it was ever a problem. Also, what is the protocol for treatment when there's no clinical signs? So another example, we've had thermal imaging and we've been able to identify a cow that looks like she's got mastitis. She's got very hot udder. No clinical signs, so we can't treat her. She actually went down with it 4 days later and was extremely ill. So this is the difficult bit. How do we actually use the data? Also the costs. So there's cost of the device, but there's also data costs and support and maintenance. And also you can have equipment failure and sensor drift. So again, it's keeping an eye on this as an issue. The other challenges are that human observation is highly subjective and potentially inconsistent. This is probably a good thing, because if we all agreed, then life would be very boring. But we don't know who is correct. So again, trying to ground truth this technology can be quite difficult. Could the sensors cause harm to the animals? So actually placing the sensors on, they've got a lot better over the years, but it's not uncommon for a rub to occur because of the bands around the cow's leg or similar. So again, it's just making sure that we're not doing any harm by using these sensors. And also technology is really good at identifying the problem, but not necessarily the solution. So again, you might have all of this information going to the farmers, but they don't necessarily know what treatment protocol to then use it for. So the key thing from me, and I absolutely stand by this, no amount of technology can replace good people. We want good people looking after our animals, but it can make their life a little bit easier. It has to have meaningful and useful outputs, so the alerts have to be appropriate and they have to not be too many of them. They need to integrate with each other, so this is another problem. We have several bits of technology on our cows at the RVC farm. None of them speak to each other, so at one point our farm manager was entering calving dates into 3 different systems, and that got a bit tedious. We need to avoid single measures. We want to make sure that we're putting something on that will measure lots of things. And another thing that people don't really sort of realise is that farmers don't own their own data necessarily. So sometimes you're paying to have your own data back, which does seem a bit strange. So this data is being collected, but they don't necessarily own it. And what do we do with things like subclinical disease? So as I mentioned with the mastitis case, what do we do when we haven't got a clinical outcome? So I put to you, in the end, is technology improving production or welfare? Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much to Nicola, who also kept within the 10 minutes magnificently without any prodding from me.
I'll have to break that record.
No pressure, therefore, on our third speaker, Kevin Corley, who is founder and chief scientific officer at EquiTrace. Kevin.
Thank you very much. I need to advance these. So I'm going to talk about horses and the way technology is beginning to impact the way we look after horses. I'm going to concentrate on 4 main areas. Wearables. There's a lot of interest in wearables now. The Fitbit for horses, I hear that all the time in pitches. Lameness evaluation, which I think is a very interesting area. Traceability, which is an area I'm particularly interested in. And just a small comment on text generative AI at the end. So wearables, this is a huge growing section. There have already been companies gone and failed, more companies developing, and it potentially has very exciting possibilities for horses in that we can get early warning, we can observe horses even when we're not directly observing them, get information about disease processes, get information about recovery from disease, know when they're foaling, know when they have colic, and we can put together a lot of data and refine our ways of monitoring these diseases. This is a video of one of the market leaders, Piers. This is directly from their website. And you can see here that it's applied and then the device is placed into the harness, and then you have to apply alcohol, which we'll say in a minute. And that's one potential negative in that alcohol can dry, so that affects accuracy, but also alcohol's not benign on the skin. And from ultrasounding a lot of horses, we always wash off the alcohol at the end because it's not benign sitting on the skin. And we're potentially setting up dermatitis on these horses. So comfort and possible skin disease is one issue. Accuracy is another issue. There's a study showing that in endurance horses, the temperature generated by these devices is not useful. And so because it's measuring skin temperature rather than core body temperature, it doesn't correlate well with core body temperature. The other thing with accuracy is if they're generating a lot of false alarms, it potentially harms the welfare of the horse, because if it's saying the horse is foaling or colicking and you run and look and it's not colicking or foaling, if it does it 2 or 3 times, then you're going to be slower with your response. And it actually can harm you finding that horse and responding to it because, it's just going again. Cost. Some of these units cost €2,000 per horse, and so they're not a universal solution at the moment. Some of the units are coming down, but they're potentially not universal at this time. And also, if you have got a horse on its own in a stall and you've stopped going into it, that's actually taking some of its social interaction away. And we have to consider that as well. If you're not going into the horse, you're taking away social interaction from that horse. So lameness evaluation. There's a couple of interesting items in this. Sleep seems to be the market leader, which is a video analysis system. There's several others around. And then there's StrideSafe, which is being used to look at the regular movement of racehorses when they exercise and try and detect when there's an abnormality to early find diseases and prevent horses racing or exercising when lameness develops. They're still early days for that. There was a recent article saying that it was used at one racecourse and there had no breakdowns, but we don't have enough science yet to say whether that was because of that or because of some other intervention. It may be more consistent when evaluating response to nerve blocks or treatments, and they're potentially very exciting. Again, accuracy may be an issue, especially if there's superimposed neurologic disease. And as humans, we tend to over-rely on technology. If the thing says the horse is lame left hind, and I'm looking at it and it's lame right hind, I'm probably going to believe the technology. We have a tendency to question ourselves and believe technology. And we have to be careful about that because technology is not always right. One of the things I always say to residents when I'm training them is, if the lab results and the horse don't agree, question the lab results. Look at the horse is telling you what's there. A potential risk also is de-skilling veterinarians. My mental arithmetic is not as good as my dad's. I used to remember all these phone numbers when I was a kid. I can still remember the phone numbers from when I was a kid, but I don't know any of my friends' phone numbers now. And so if we provide these tools, we may not actually have the skills ourselves, and we may need them. And cost is also an issue. Traceability is something I'm particularly interested in. It's absolutely vital for animal welfare to know where the animals are so you can ensure their welfare. It's also vital for disease outbreak. I mean, after COVID, everyone knows about traceability and early in disease, trying to find diseased animals and looking for them. It's particularly interesting in horses because horses move more than any other animal except man. But it's really difficult because there's low levels of compliance. And it's something we absolutely have to address in horses because a key issue for us and a key challenge to the social license, rightly, is what happens to horses after racing. And if we lose track of what happens to horses, we can't prevent bad outcomes like this.
Hello and welcome. Tonight, the dark side of the horse racing industry.
Stand by, and they're racing in the Melbourne.
I think they're purposely hiding this from the general public because if they were to know, I don't think we'd be getting 100,000 people going to the Melbourne.
Tonight, we investigate what happens to racehorses when their careers end.
So, what are the challenges with traceability? Well, the problem is we mainly only use the stick. And we're quite good at getting horses at the point that they're registered. And we're quite good when they're first registered. But we're really bad at then detecting changes in ownership and death of the animal. And that's what this European study said. Our current forms of traceability are actually a registration. They're not real traceability. And so we need some carrot as well as the stick, and that's something we've been looking at. So we're looking at traceability as a byproduct. Can you make traceability so that I do normal management practices and I'm accidentally, in effect, creating traceability data? So how can we do that? Well, various examples. Scan a horse onto a transport, scan a horse off. I've got a record of its journey. I can send a text message to the owner that the horse has arrived. I can bill, and I've got traceability data as a byproduct of my management processes. Temperature is something I'm very interested in for very much this reason, in that if you use a biothermal chip, place it correctly in the muscle rather than the nuchal ligament, you've got a very accurate temperature. Scan that horse's temperature, and not only do I get the horse's temperature much safer than I would, it comes with identity, and it can also come with location. And so I can have a system where I'm not only able to trace those horses through routine measurement of their temperature, but I can also say, hang on, there's a temperature cluster in this area. This could be the beginnings of a disease outbreak. And depending on the government system, I can either say those individual horses need to be examined, or I can just alert vets in the area and say, not break privacy, but say, hang on, there's an unusual cluster, have a look at your horses. Lastly, just very briefly, there's been a lot about ChatGPT. This has been slightly spoiled by a recent case in the BBC that the BBC highlighted where a lawyer used ChatGPT and all their references were wrong. The same can happen in equine medicine. You ask the 4 most important peer-reviewed publication in the equine medicine, and it gives you a very, very plausible result. It says it ranks them based on the citation count on Google Scholar. None of these papers actually exist. ChatGPT tells stories. It does not produce scientific data. So just to show you, if I look at laminitis and Brzezinski in PubMed, no results. All of these are make-believe papers. A couple of them are quite close to normal papers, but they're all make-believe. Oops. So in conclusion, even in traditional sections like the horse industry, technology is being rapidly adopted. We need some regulation. An example is the non-validated genetic test for muscle disease, which Beaver highlighted recently and are leading to horses being put down when they don't actually have the disease. And we've got the chance to enormously increase horse welfare with careful application of this technology. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kevin, and thank you for all the questions you've been sending in already on Slido. Do feel free to add to those questions. Do feel free to give your name if you'd like to. Every question so far is anonymous, but do feel free to contribute with a name if you'd like to. Anonymous is fine. Keep those questions coming in as we move on to our final speaker, who is Piers Hampson, who is Head of Product Companion Animal Technology at MSD Animal Health. Piers.
Thank you very much. Afternoon, everyone. I think it's first important to give you two pieces of context. I'm not a veterinarian, I'm a pet owner. And 10 years ago, I joined a company that started building products from a pet owner point of view. So I think it's important to remember that as I talk. That's my lens, my context for sharing this with you today. And equally as important to that journey is Mia. She's my 13-year-old Labrador, and she's been with me every step of the way. She comes to the office every time I go to the office. She works from home every time I work from home. So she is very much the partner in everything I do. And that's not just unique to myself. Everybody that I've worked with over the last 10 years is also a pet owner and has their pets as an intrinsic part of their life. I'm going to take us through a bit of a journey today where we, I guess, look at this from a companion animal point of view. We'll root ourselves in what does technology mean today for companion animals and where does it come from? Our vision of the future and how we see that this could evolve potentially. And I think it's important to state that we're maybe a little earlier on the journey than in the livestock and production animal spheres of use of technology. Some of the challenges and opportunities, and finally, where are we today in terms of what we can offer to animal welfare? So, what do we mean? Technology in companion animal started, I guess, being used probably in the late 2000s, really was when we saw a rise in technology. And a lot of that was from convenience. Pet owners wanting to understand and have the ability to connect with their animal when they weren't at home. Of course, the environment back then was working in an office 9 to 5, so understanding when your animal had gone outside via their cat flap or being able to check in with them with a camera was incredibly important to the customer. Over time, though, and where we are now, is that we see a rising need from the pet owner for reassurance, understanding, insight. They want to understand more about their pet. They want to feel more connected. They don't just want the convenience of, oh, I'm going to drop some food. They want to understand what the animal's eaten, when they've eaten it. Has that changed? Is there anything in that pattern? Do I need to do something better myself? They always want to know, can they be better? Are they the best pet parent that they can be? So we've got a number of companies here. So there's devices like this one that are around location and moving into on-animal devices where they're monitoring activity, sleep quality, even barking, scratching, and shaking. You've got what I call nearables, which is this category here, which are devices that animals interact with, typically part of their normal day. So you've got feeding apparatus, drinking stations, and even litter robot here, which not only conveniently removes all of the dirty stuff that you don't want to deal with, it also tells you how much is coming out, weighs it all, and how frequent, and that sort of thing. And then you've got in-clinic environment devices that are springing up, which are thermometers that are non-rectal, let's say, and other devices that are harnesses measuring heartbeat, respiration rate, etc. So we've got a broad spectrum of technology, and typically you'll find most of it sits in the at-home environment and driven by the pet owner. So, where are we today, and what could the future look like? My perception as a pet owner is that we're somewhat reactive. We wait until that we see a problem that is significant enough to engage with the clinician. And it's only when we feel like our pet isn't quite themselves that we reach out. We often feel like we work in isolation. We turn to Dr. Google because it's the quickest thing on hand, and annoying a vet with our silly little question might not be the right way to go. It's a reality that many pet owners find themselves in today. And then for the veterinarian, when you're faced with this pet, my understanding is that the pet owner offers you those ultimate phrase of they just don't see themselves. And then you have to dig into and figure out what that history is, what's causing it. And you have a very, very limited understanding of that individual specific animal. And then you're treating that animal with a set of knowledge that you were provided with at your training and through your continued studies. But it's knowledge built on the back of others and their clinical studies and the papers that you read. So it's rooted in a certain space and time. Where could we go? The future could be proactive. It could be pet owners work with vets. They're there 24/7, 365 through the combination of data being collected all the time at home environments. The ability for the veterinarian not only to leverage the knowledge and skill that they've gained over years, but create new intelligence, to create new understanding that is specific to the animal. And what would that look like in a real-world example? Well, if I had an animal presented to me today that said, well, not presented to me, I wouldn't get one, but presented to a veterinarian today, and they said, oh, I don't think they're drinking enough. What's enough? There's a couple of studies here that, one's from 1975, another from 2010 referenced 13 cats. That's all we could achieve. We could achieve to understand the consumption of 13 cats in a clinical environment, and now a veterinarian anywhere in the world might use that data to make a clinical judgment on how well an animal is in their practice. What happens if you could take huge data sets? What happens if you could leverage the environment that you're not only practicing in, but the environment that the cat's in? What happens if you collect data for years on that specific animal and then place it against different cohorts of animals of like age, gender, neutered status, geographical location, diet? The opportunity to be more specific and create individualized and better health outcomes is significant. It does bring some challenges and opportunities. So I think it's been mentioned before, but not all technology is equal. And there's many different manufacturers entering this marketplace. They will have different claims as to what their technology can do. And I think Nicola said that they actually had someone typing data into different formats. It's a significant challenge. How do you, as professionals, interpret that data? What does it all mean? How do I interpret it to have positive clinical outcomes and not just become more noise? And will it take too long to understand? I mean, at the moment, we don't even engage with the veterinary industry to create standards and an understanding of what we're producing. But if we did, we could have objective assessment where there's no in-clinic bias, certainly for companion animals that are removed from their normal home environment, white coat syndrome. You don't get the owner bias. Someone earlier was talking about bias in a different way. We can potentially remove and negate some of that. We can have truly individualized care. So no longer creating a care pathway based on a study that was done in 1975, but based on animals in London in 2023, you could create a pathway. You could treat and you could see the efficacy of outcome as well. I mean, that's essentially what the long-term monitoring versus single individualized readings yields, is you're able to see change. We talked a lot about change earlier, but in seeing change, you get a lot more of that buy-in and maintenance of treatment. And finally, I think it extends veterinary care beyond the practice. It removes the pet owner from being isolated, and it engages you at every single point. So with that, I'll finish with, efficiencies in workflow. Apparently I put that on the slide as well. It could. If you don't have to take long histories, you don't have to spend time doing that in clinic, you can spend more time creating the treatment pathway, spend more time that you don't have on more patients maybe. A lot of this is future thinking, but the opportunity is there. Improve outcomes. I've said that. So where are we today? So as MSD Animal Health, we have a division of technology that predominantly focuses on nearables for feline. And we're very pleased to say that in the next few months, we're going to be launching what is a 30-day report. And this has come from our pet owners have had information for a long, long time. They've said to us, I'm showing my application to my vet. I want to be able to give them more information. They're asking me about historical data. Well, we're giving you that now. So this is the first steps, though. This isn't by any means the end point. This is the first steps to engage with the veterinarian. And we need to open up that conversation and work together to see what is appropriate for the future. But you could potentially have a report here that shows you a day-by-day breakdown. Where's my pointer? So this is 30 days. You've got a 6-month historical trend over here. You can see specific events when they're occurring and the individual amounts here. So this is a first look at that. It could be for food. It could be for activity and time spent outside, and it could be for water consumption. Really, the opportunities are just dependent on the technology product in place. So I guess my point is, could technology change the way in which and challenge the way that we have better welfare for animals? I would say yes, but it starts today for companion animal, and it's a part of the journey that we're only just beginning, and it needs your involvement and your engagement. Thank you.
Piers, thank you very much, and thank you to all our speakers. It's clearly given you plenty of food for thought, judging by the number of questions that are popping up on Slido. We're going to invite contributions, questions, comments, but if they're comments, keep them very brief, please, or I'll be brutal from the floor. But very good to hear from you as well. I'm going to start with one question that's come in via Slido, but I will look for hands around the room as well. Going to start with this one, which doesn't have a name attached to it. Do add your name if you feel like it. Are there many examples of using tech to directly promote positive welfare beyond assessment? Who would like to start me off? You're all looking at each other. Go on, John, you're nearest.
Is this okay, or is it...
Yep.
Yeah, cool, okay. So I think it's a good question, isn't it, because we get down to specifics. I think there's obviously lots of promise that's there. I think the delivery of things is still, as Piers described, in early stages in some cases. But I think let's pick up some of the established technologies which, by early intervention, by actually understanding where we have perhaps lack of labour or potentially increased distance, if we can see an animal that's basically in distress, say at calving, then actually there's a huge opportunity therefore to be able to intervene early before there's a big welfare problem. So, I mean, kind of camera technologies have really helped that in a way to deal with some of the human social element where we've got people doing 3 jobs and therefore trying to make sure that they can have good attention to their animals when they're under pressure. So I think there's an intervention bit by being able to move earlier to avoid welfare compromise by seeing that change. I think the other exciting parts of this, though, are recognising where we can see now with greater reliability of some of the bigger picture bits. So we can actually understand kind of populations and therefore have veterinary advice or other advisory advice to change how a system is running, to understand if there's either a heat stress problem or understand impacts of a particular building design and therefore change that proactively. I think there are good examples that are coming through with those technologies.
Okay, lots of questions to get through. Anybody else want to chip in very quickly on that? Go on.
20 seconds. Real world example, Mia, my Labrador, wears a on-collar sensor that she has atopic dermatitis. She has a treatment protocol that was a monthly injection. Through wearing that collar, we were able to see that her scratching and shaking increased dramatically towards the 30-31 day mark. She was having flare-ups and getting all puffy and red. We changed the treatment protocol to 28 days and she hasn't had a flare-up in 6 years. So for me, that's a direct example of that.
Thank you for that. Question from the floor. Who would like to start us off? Right down the front here. Don't break your leg as you sprint down the steps.
Hi, thank you very much. I think it's important, if we're talking about the role of technology and animal welfare, to look at, I guess, the darker side of technology and how it's really driven just abysmal treatment of animals, from the bit, which is a metal piece that goes in the corner of a horse's mouth and used to control them in incredibly painful ways, to the gas chamber, where the pig is lowered down and screams as they die, to the electric prod, which drives a cow to be killed when they don't want to. And I think that, for me, technology is never, ever, ever going to be a solution to any of these problems, because it's fundamental to the system of animal farming and our broken relationship with animals. And I think we all here need to ask far deeper questions about what our relationship to animals is.
Thank
and
you.
how we move forward.
Thank you. Go on, John.
Yeah, I can pick that one up. I think we've got a complex relationship with technology in society, haven't we? And I think it's what came out of a lot of this sort of panel's presentations is, I think, acknowledging that there is a need for human input and responsible use of technology. I think there's a really clear sort of dialogue here, which is about not replacing the human element. And I would say that those responsibilities of how we use technology for the better are the same in terms of how we look at human interaction, human behaviour, human welfare and well-being. So I think, it's obviously easy to use really emotive language, and we can create, therefore, emotional pictures. And the first talk today showed how we are really emotional beings. And I think, therefore, it's important that we recognise that there's a need for an evidence base to sit alongside the emotion. And I think where technology can be really helpful is to do that, and therefore allow us to achieve real progress in welfare, but using the evidence base in a really important way.
Thank you. There's another question over here on the floor, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Brew. A number of people in this room have used grimace scale recognition of pain in a range of species. We've done some work with sheep and with horses, which allow the identification of an individual which is in pain. And one of the interesting developments of this was that my colleague Christopher Clennon and I collaborated with people in the computer science department to use human face recognition programs to identify which individuals were showing sufficient grimace to indicate that they were in substantial pain. And so that is a possibility. And it in the long run could be an app which people could use with their own animals on farm, in stables and so on. It's also been used for laboratory animals. And my question to people here is, to what extent do you think that could be used? It seems to me there are real possibilities. We're just at the beginning of it, but what do you think about it?
Nicola, that kind of feeds into what you were saying about cows being very stoic, amongst other things.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing we could definitely look at. Horses particularly, sorry to chip in on that, they're very, very honest communicators. So you can see very clearly on a horse's face the fact that they're looking worried, they're stressed, etc. But if you have an app, as you suggest, that kind of takes out the fact that you've got to actually recognise that is a thing. Because I've got lots of colleagues that I'm going, that horse looks worried, and they're going, what are you on about? I was like, well, look at his eye. So yeah, it really helps to bring that, well, take the subjectivity out, I suppose, is what, yeah. Thank you.
Kevin, did you want to chip in on that? You were looking interested.
I think it's very interesting. I think that with all these things, we have to train them on the individual before, because, for example, there are cameras which can predict foaling in horses, but they have to be trained for 3 days of the horse, that individual horse in that box, before they can predict foaling. And I think we have to not run before we can walk with some of this technology, because otherwise people will be pointing their app at horses and saying that horse is not in pain when its leg is hanging off. So, I think it's really important to, as I said, not over-rely on technology. I do technology, I'm very excited by it, but we have to make sure that we're not overselling what we can achieve so that it benefits the animals.
Here's a different concern from Josh Lerb on Slido. Is there a risk that better tools for detecting illness earlier in pets could lead to more over-treatment, thus harming animal welfare? Piers?
Yep, just reading it again. I guess if it was unregulated, yes. But I think that's where we have the responsibility to engage and make sure that those detections of illness are true and are validated by a clinician. And I would argue that technology would prevent overtreatment, in that you might not need to apply treatment for as long if you can see that the animal is recovered quicker. So it could potentially be used for overtreatment, but equally it could prevent overtreatment.
I can just see owners saying, but the app says he's ill, doc. But the app says he's ill, and the pressure from clients for treatment can be high if the algorithm's wrong.
Yeah, and I think that's where you very much have to be responsible. We don't do that. At no point do we ever tell the customer, this is the thing with your animal. It is very much engage with a clinician, here's the data that we've seen, allow them to do their job. Yeah. And it's more of an FYI, this has changed. So I think that's incredibly important, is not to say the animal is ill with this. That is a leap too far, certainly at this stage, and not one that we're specifically even contemplating.
I've got a broadly related question from Slido, but if you'd like to let our roving mic operators let us know if you've got a question. There's a few at the back there on this side and down the front here. I'll come to that side and then there in a second after a question from Alice Moore, Chair of the BVA Policy Committee on Slido. As professionals, how can we compete with unreliable data collected by clients and not for altruistic welfare reasons? How do we avoid exploiting animals and owners, keepers, John?
I mean, I think I'm going to return to the education point, because I think, we've got the opportunity as attending professionals, as vets, but also the whole vet-led team and as advisors, to be really key filters. And I think support, therefore, from early stages of training, so that we equip basically the future vets to be able to handle those challenges, is really important. I think to be greeted with that in a busy practice situation without having appropriate training is really challenging. So I think we've got to get to the start where we've got confident graduates that are able to handle both the technology interpretation, but also to understand that part of their role is that filter.
Okay, thank you. Question down the front on this side, was it?
So, really interesting, and I'm just trying to get my thoughts around this, because I'm concerned that with all the data that you're saying, we end up using human-centred needs, using the data for our human-centred needs overlaid on the animal-centred needs. So what we end up with is not seeing them as sentient animals, but as Nicola says, as production tools, because the data tells us we can do this, because economically it's viable, because all the data says everything's fine. Where actually, if they were in their natural environment, and we can argue on what's natural environment, then their behaviours may be different. So I'm just concerned that they become, as Nicola says, a production, and we stop seeing them as a sentient animal because the data tells us so.
Nicola?
I think with that one, you have got, so obviously you're saying that, yeah, it's just a productive unit. That's not what I'm for at all. A lot of this technology learns what's normal for that animal. So yes, whether it's at grass, whether it's inside, it learns what's normal for that animal. So then it gives you the alert based on a change in that animal rather than... So yes, there will be different algorithms potentially depending on where your animal is, and that's where maybe using it for... I don't know what that was. Don't know what's going on.
No one's done anything up here.
It's the technology.
It's the technology.
Always need a human element.
I've forgotten what I was going to say.
That's completely understandable. Anybody else on the panel want to add? Go on, John. And Kevin, after you.
Yeah, just find good. I think it's a really good point, isn't it? And the risks of misuse of technology, and therefore, as you say, basically perpetuating those sort of, the algorithm says this. I think that's absolutely right. But at the same time, I think if we look at developing the science and really understand how we use those technologies in lots of different situations, in lots of different environments, we understand, as Don said, actually how we basically reference it and validate it against really well-established ways of measuring welfare, then I think that's why it needs the interpretation.
Thank you. Kevin?
Just on algorithms, I think there is danger in algorithms, and I was discussing earlier, there's a slightly dated book now called Weapons of Math Destruction, and it shows things like if you want to eliminate bias in your hiring, so you've noticed that you mainly hire and promote white males, and you try and create an algorithm that looks at who's been successful in your company, but then eliminates white and male as a way it can promote people, it still promotes white males, and actually more than you did, because your bias was to promote white males, and it looks for co-founders, so plays croquet or whatever it is, member of the country club, whatever it is that picks out a white male. The algorithm will pick that out and promote what you were trying to prevent in yourself. So we have to be careful that our technology doesn't worsen our biases and behaviours rather than improve them.
Thank you. Question towards the back there.
Just relating back to what Malcolm said earlier, connection before correction. With the app that you're proposing, using real-time data from the animal's behaviour and their drinking and eating behaviours, do you not think that we're that could lead to us kind of ignoring the input of the owners themselves? Because at the end of the day, we as human beings, we don't just hand our Fitbit over to the doctor and say, there you go, have at it. They still rely on us sitting down and telling them what's wrong. And obviously, part of the reason we're all here is that the main welfare issue is that animals cannot actually accurately tell us what's going on with them. So I just want to know what you guys thought about that and the human element from the owners themselves.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important to not discount the pet owner. I mean, after all, we're building, the reason why is the pet owner and their pets. So I very much view it as a tool and an addition to what that pet owner can provide to the veterinarian, and provides the veterinarian with context and understanding of what the pet's been through in the home environment through clinical signs and measurement that the pet owner, maybe in an emotional state, isn't able to convey, but they're able to convey other things. So I definitely don't think it's to replace, it's to work in conjunction with and enhance that rather than, so definitely not replace.
Nicola?
Can I just add that it comes down to context as well. So, for example, I'm going to give you a cow example. We let all the cows out. They went out to the field. They had a lovely time. They all started running around. I got 52 heat alerts. So it's having someone that can interpret the data. So even if you do get this data, you still have to have an element of understanding about it. Another one is we've had a cow that had another heat alert. So that basically saying high activity, she was actually calving. So you had to think, well, that cow is not at that stage of production, so that cannot mean what it's saying it means. So it comes down to, bringing it all back to also having the human aspect as well to interpret that isn't correct.
Thank you, John. Quick thought?
Just really briefly, it's just looking at animal keepers more generally. It's one of the reasons why the first part of the animal health and welfare pathway is about making a connection. The first part is literally just creating an opportunity for building a relationship to challenge and actually look at further development.
Thank you. Lots and lots of questions coming on Slido. Thanks for all of those. I'll come to another one. Again, if you let the roving mic folk know if you'd like to ask a question, there's I think one down the front here. On Slido, are there any ways you can see technology reducing the number of animals we use? For example, lab-grown meat, virtual reality zoos, AI-generated racing, etc. Don't all rush at once.
Outside my expertise, no idea.
Potentially, but I think the focus of today is the animal.
Yeah.
So we're not trying to replace the animals. But they are obviously valid options. But I've used virtual reality for training because I was trying to teach pig production in a Muslim country. So, you can use technology in a variety of ways.
Go on.
Just really quickly, I mean, maybe augmented reality might be a different way to look at it, though. I think trying to avoid this binary either-or conversation is really important. So I think augmented rather than VR.
Questions on the floor? Hello.
I'm not sure this... So we use quite a lot of technology in our small animal practice, continuous glucose measurement, monitors, home blood pressure cuffs and things like that. And we've actually found it on the whole means that we get a lot more reliable data and actually don't need to spend as much of our time sort of assessing animals in the clinic, and it frees up a lot of vet time. We kind of have the same issue we've always had in terms of the owners who are very keen to seek out our help and advice will come to us with this data and ask us to interpret it. And the owners who don't have as much trust in us will take that data, make their own assumptions, and try and change treatment plans themselves at home. So it's just a case of, although this technology is available, and I personally do find it quite useful, I think for me, the thing that's still the issue is just getting owner compliance and getting owners to interact with the veterinary community a little bit more than they currently are. It's just your thoughts about that.
Nicola?
I think that's a really good point, and we have the same with farmers and the technology, trying to get people to engage with what the actual output is. And yeah, we definitely don't want to end up in a situation where someone goes, oh, the glucose has changed, I'll just tweak its insulin. I mean, that would be a disaster. So yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. We just need it comes back to the training.
Here's a different area to what we've discussed so far from somebody on Slido. What is the role of legislation in supporting technological advances, if there is such a role? John?
Well, I think obviously there are situations where things, cross boundaries. But I think the opportunity for kind of early redirection of behaviour that we don't want is really important. So there is, again, back to the kind of training and education. Can we actually prevent things getting to a point where we need to deploy legislation because things have gone wrong? So I think the idea of education first still is really key. Can we prevent the problems? But there will be a need, of course, if behaviour and if basically situations occur, that we do have boundaries that we can protect welfare.
Kevin?
I think legislation has a place, but it doesn't always equals compliance. And for example, in Ireland, you're supposed to keep horse movement records. In Queensland, you're supposed to keep horse movement records. The compliance with it's very, very poor. And so just because the law's there doesn't actually mean that you get the outcome you want.
Thank you. Down to the last 2 or 3 minutes, might try and rattle through a couple more. Anybody else on the floor? Yeah. Sir.
Hi. We've heard quite a bit about how technology can be used to intervene where animals are failing to thrive in a situation that is potentially high pressure, whether that be in a pet ownership or a production system. But there's quite a difference, I suppose, between a life worth living and a good life. Can you see a future for technology in demonstrating the benefits of higher welfare systems and therefore an incentivisation of adoption of those systems?
Kevin?
Absolutely, yeah. If you can prove that, for example, more time in the pasture for horses is beneficial both to their welfare and performance, people will follow that. So, people do certain things because of tradition, and we need data to try and break those traditions. And for example, one of the things I always want is horses out in the pasture rather than in stables. But we need to show people that it's okay.
Nicola?
Absolutely. I mean, that's where things like play behaviour is so exciting, because we could really look at how positive that animal's life is, and things like using play behaviour and so on, and also using it as a metric to promote higher welfare products. Convincing people to pay for it is another aspect, but certainly if we could have a metric that says that these animals have been meeting their targets in terms of lying times, in terms of feeding, all the good things. Definitely agree with you.
This might have to be the final question on Slido. It's one of the very first to be asked. How does a farmer focus on the most important data and reflect on it when they may be overwhelmed with data? Go on.
I think the first thing is having a really good relationship with their kind of farm team, so that actually they know how to prioritise and they have the support. So they have the support to be able to use the information and prioritise with it. So I think if we rely on purely just information as an algorithm and then a response, that's not the best way to use it. So I think with support and with training.
Nicola?
I think that's where the alerts come in, and also sort of giving a prioritised list to someone, because again, I've been out and mobility scored a really large herd of cows, and I've given a list of 90 cows to someone that's only the one person trimming. That's not achievable. So it's but having it early means that you're more likely to do it little and often. But again, it's down to the technology to sort of do a little bit of the prioritising for you, not taking it away from people. But if you've got a red alert versus a yellow one, that might be more helpful.
Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you all for your questions. That's all we've got time for on the question front. I want to go back to that statement I invited responses to right at the very start, and we'll see if there's been any change at all. There might not have been. So back to Slido, if you're not there already. I see the value in using technology to further animal welfare. That is the statement that we are asking you to respond to. And the three options, you can vote not yet, I don't understand its relevance or role, potentially, but I have concerns, e.g. usability, reliability, or yes, I am a user and or advocate.
We put everyone off.
It's broadly similar. Some, just to remind you, at the start, the vote went 53% for option one. It's still the same. 44%, exactly the same.
No, it's
switching around a little bit.
The top two have switched.
Top two have switched around. They have. So we're left with 44% yes, I am, or will become a user and or advocate. 54% potentially, but I have concerns. Thank you all very much for your participation in that.